Your car can feel perfectly fine on those quick 5 to 10 minute trips around town. No warning lights, no strange noises, nothing that tells you what is happening under the hood. So how can a drive shorter than your TV episode silently set up a repair bill? Dealerships and independent shops across the US, UK, and Australia keep watching the same pattern repeat. Engines that look pampered swallow thousands of dollars in work, and it is not aggressive driving. When most people think about being kind to their car, they picture short, stop-start commutes, just a few miles at a time, ticking local errands off the list. The engine fires, you roll through a couple of junctions or lights, park again, and everything feels effortless. That pattern is what many city drivers in suburban America, small British towns, or Australian suburbs quietly label as easy use. From the driver's seat, it seems calm and harmless, but in terms of what is happening inside the engine, those same short trips are a completely different story. A short trip is not really about hitting a specific number on a clock. It is any journey where the engine is switched off again before it has reached and stayed at its proper operating temperature. On these runs, internal parts begin to warm, but they do not stay hot long enough for the system to stabilize and work in its designed range. Workshop experience consistently points out that repeated short journeys leave engines running below their ideal temperature band, especially in everyday stop-and-go town and suburb use. It feels relaxed from the outside, yet the engine is constantly being asked to start from cold and then shut down again just as it is settling. That operating temperature matters because it is what allows moisture and combustion byproducts to be burned off and carried away in normal running. When the engine is switched off too soon, traces of condensation can remain inside, and carbon deposits from incomplete combustion are more likely to start building up instead of clearing. Over weeks and months of school runs, grocery trips, and quick hops to the station or the shops, those brief drives stack into a pattern of use the engine was never meant to live in all the time. Service professionals also describe these short trips as among the harshest conditions for efficient operation. The engine is asked to handle repeated cold starts, richer mixtures, and constant stop-and-go traffic, but it rarely enjoys the cleaner, steadier running it would see on longer stretches at temperature. From the owner's point of view, it looks like gentle, careful driving that should extend the life of the car, but the real problem starts when that gentle pattern quietly becomes the only way the car is ever used. That is when a habit that feels gentle starts quietly working against the engine. Inside a modern engine, temperature is not just a comfort metric on the dashboard, it is the line between a clean cycle and a dirty one. On a proper drive, metal parts expand to their intended clearances, and fluids circulate at the speed they were designed for. A short trip interrupts that process halfway. The engine is woken from cold, rushed through the richest part of its operation, and then shut down again before it can settle into its natural rhythm. It feels uneventful in the driver's seat, but it quietly changes what is left behind inside the engine after shutdown. When the engine never spends long at its true operating temperature, moisture from combustion and from the surrounding air has fewer opportunities to evaporate and leave the system. Instead of being burned off during a longer, steady run, tiny droplets can linger on internal surfaces and in vapor around the crankcase. Approved garages regularly warn that repeated short journeys allow this moisture to accumulate where drivers never see it. The engine oils and metals sit in a damp environment meant to be dried out by heat and time, not sealed in and switched off. Over months of repeated cold starts and early shutdowns, that trapped moisture becomes a constant background condition rather than an occasional byproduct. Alongside the water, there is another residue that depends heavily on temperature and time: carbon. Efficient combustion depends on the engine being warm enough and stable enough to burn fuel cleanly. Short trips, especially in stop-and-go town traffic, keep it in the phase where combustion is richer and less complete. Tires Plus describes these short journeys as trips where the engine does not have the chance to reach its ideal temperature range and that incomplete operation harms efficiency. Each time the car is used this way, traces of carbon can slowly form instead of being fully cleared, adding another layer to what is quietly building up. At first, these deposits and droplets are invisible and seem harmless. They sit on internal surfaces in low spots in the crankcase and in passages rarely considered until something fails. However, the serious problem begins when that moisture and carbon stop being a light film and start becoming a coating. The more often the engine is run cold and shut down early, the more chance those residues have to thicken rather than disperse. In colder parts of the US and UK, morning starts keep engines cooler for longer, so this pattern is more noticeable in daily use. But the buildup does not stay a winter-only concern. Even in warmer regions and Australian suburbs, every journey still begins from a cold start. That is why garages look warily at cars that live almost entirely on short trips, even when their mileage seems low and their usage feels gentle. The pattern is not dramatic abuse, it is the quiet repetition of the worst temperature window for the engine's chemistry. From the outside, the car simply hops between homes, schools, shops, and stations around town. Inside, condensation that never fully burns off and carbon that quietly sticks to internal surfaces are allowed to quietly exist day after day. Over time, those uneventful drives become the background condition that sets up more serious wear and performance problems later in the engine's life. Once moisture and combustion residues are inside the engine, they do not just sit on metal surfaces, they are carried and stored in the oil that is supposed to protect those same parts. Engine oil is meant to flow, to reach temperature, and to suspend small amounts of contamination while the system is hot and working efficiently. On a short trip, that cycle is cut off early. The engine is switched off while the oil is still relatively cool and thick, and before heat and circulation have had time to move unwanted moisture back out of the system. What should be a cleansing phase becomes a storage phase instead. Garages that see a lot of town-driven cars consistently point out that repeated short journeys allow more moisture and carbon to end up mixed into the oil film. Instead of being burned away in longer, steady running, traces of water and soot stay blended into the lubricant and around the oil system. That changes how well the oil can do its job. A film of oil with extra moisture and combustion byproducts is less stable under stress than the same oil in cleaner conditions. It still looks like a smooth liquid on the dipstick, but the chemistry behind that smooth surface is not the same. Every cold start and early shutdown adds another small dose to what is already there. Short trips in real life rarely mean a gentle cruise at one speed. They usually mean exactly the stop-and-go pattern that is hardest on oil. From the engine's perspective, that is a chain of rich starts: brief low-speed running, braking, idling, and shutdown. Service information describing this pattern classifies short stop-start town use as a harsh environment for both the oil system and even the battery, because neither gets the extended run they were designed around. Instead of hours at a stable temperature with clean flow, the oil spends most of its life in the cold, thick, contaminated part of its operating range. That is why stop-and-go use is known to reduce oil life compared with more balanced driving. The driver does not see any of this directly. When the bonnet is opened at home, the dipstick may show oil at the right level with a color that looks acceptable for the mileage. But the serious problem begins when that apparently healthy oil is actually carrying more moisture and combustion residue than it should. Under load, a weakened oil film can lose strength more quickly between moving metal surfaces. The result is not a dramatic failure the next morning. It is a tiny increase in wear every time the car is used this way. From the outside, the car looks well maintained. Inside, the protection margin is slimmer than the owner realizes. Modern service intervals are often set with the assumption that the car will see a mix of highway and city driving over its life. However, many urban and suburban drivers in the US, the UK, and Australia now live almost entirely in short, low-speed, stop-and-go trips. The engine rarely gets the long, hot runs that those intervals quietly depend on. In low-speed urban traffic, hopping between roundabouts and junctions or crawling through lights, the oil is repeatedly pushed through its most demanding phase and then told to sit with whatever it has collected. In inner-city areas, or for cars that only travel a short distance to a station or local shops, there may be no proper highway run at all to counterbalance that pattern. That is where the feeling of unfairness later comes from. Owners follow the calendar, change their oil on time, and avoid anything that looks like abusive driving, yet the engine still wears faster than they expected. The wear did not arrive in one dramatic event. It was cut into the engine a fraction at a time by oil that never fully circulates at operating temperature and contaminants suspended in oil instead of being burned off. Short trips turned the lubricant from a shield into a slow delivery system for everything the engine should have shed, quietly shortening its life from the inside out. On very short drives, the electrical system is asked to do something it was never designed to do all day long: give, but barely receive. Every cold start pulls a heavy surge from the battery to crank the engine and power modern electronics. Then before the alternator has had time to replace what was taken, the key is turned off again. The pattern looks gentle from the driver's seat, just a 5 or 10 minute hop across town, but electrically it is the harshest way to live. The battery is treated like a one-way ATM, and short trips are the steady withdrawals. Over time, that imbalance matters. When a car spends its life on short journeys, the battery is repeatedly left less than fully charged between uses. That is why garages dealing with town-driven cars consistently treat frequent short trips as bad news for battery performance. The charging system simply does not get long enough at speed and at temperature to stabilize. Instead of recovering in a longer run, the battery starts each day a little more tired than it should be. In that condition, every start eats into a smaller reserve. It still turns the engine over, but it is working closer to its limits than most owners realize. Layer on top the way people actually drive in the US, the UK, and Australia, and the strain grows. In a cold American winter, a short commute with heated seats, window defrosters, lights, and a big infotainment screen running pulls far more energy out than the alternator can comfortably return in 10 minutes. In a wet British school run, wipers, blowers, lights, and stop-start traffic do the same thing at low speed. In a hot Australian suburb, the air conditioning is almost always on, even for a quick dash to the shops. However, the one constant across all three is that the trip ends just as the system should be catching up. As this pattern repeats, the battery is not the only component affected. Electrical parts downstream are being fed by a supply that spends more time in a reduced state than it was meant to. Cranking feels heavier, voltage dips are more likely under load, and drivers start to notice slow, inconsistent behavior long before anything obvious fails. But over time, that undercharged state accelerates wear inside the battery itself, shortening its useful life. The car feels modern and well-equipped, yet the way it is used quietly turns those 5 to 10 minute journeys into the worst possible routine for the electrical system. It is not sudden, and that is exactly what makes it so hard to blame. Most owners only see the result, not the slow cause. Walk into any workshop that deals with town-driven cars, and the same uncomfortable pattern appears on any weekday. Engines that belong to city-only low-mileage vehicles show wear that does not match the odometer. Oil is dark long before the owner expects it, yet service records look perfectly respectable. Batteries that should feel strong are already struggling on cold starts. From the driver's point of view, the car has barely been used. From the mechanic's point of view, that usage has quietly pushed it into harsh conditions every day. Across the U.S., service advisors see low-mileage city cars developing problems that used to be reserved for high-mileage highway cars. In the U.K., customers arrive convinced that a small hatchback doing short school runs and supermarket trips should last forever because the distance is small and they never abuse it. In Australia, cars that just circle inner-city streets between home, the station, and the shops follow the same script. The routes are short, speeds are low, and the engine, oil, and battery rarely experience a proper run at operating temperature. On paper, these cars look like they have had an easy life. In reality, they have been kept in conditions that quietly amplify the weaknesses exposed by short journeys. By this point, moisture that never quite burns off has had years to linger inside the engine. Carbon from incomplete combustion has had the same years to settle on internal surfaces and narrow critical pathways. Oil, contaminated and rarely stabilized at full operating temperature, has been asked to protect metal parts while slightly below its best. The battery, regularly discharged for starting and for running electrical loads, has had fewer chances to recover on longer drives. None of this sets off a warning light in the early stages. It simply erodes the safety margins that engineers built into the system. However, the serious financial shock arrives when those margins finally run out. A driver who never races, never tows, and follows recommended service intervals is told that major components are worn, clogged, or failing sooner than expected. To that owner, the diagnosis feels insulting, as if the car has betrayed careful treatment. To the mechanic who understands short trip use, it is simply the end point of moisture, carbon, weakened oil, and a tired battery working together over time. The engine still sounded fine until it did not. The battery still turned the starter until one morning it did not. This is the essence of the silent danger behind short trips. The pattern does not look harsh from the outside, so owners do not change it. Short, stop-and-go journeys keep engines cooler than they should, encourage contaminants to stay inside, and give electrical systems less time to recharge. For garages and service centers, that combination is one of the most unfriendly environments for engine performance, longevity, and battery health. The car seems fine until the moment a large bill lands on the counter, and by then the real damage has been accumulating for years. 1. The school-run-only SUV. In a suburban cul-de-sac, a crossover leaves the driveway for 10 minutes to the elementary school, idles in the drop-off lane, then crawls back through lights. The cabin is warm, and it feels like an easy start. Under the bonnet, the trip is just long enough for cold starts, rich mixtures, and electrical loads, but not long enough for heat to clear moisture or stabilize the battery. But the engine never really gets a chance to... 2. The grocery and coffee run hatchback. In a UK morning, a small car bounces between home, the supermarket, and the high street 5 or 6 minutes at a time, wipers and heaters working constantly. Each leg begins with a cold start and ends with the engine shut down before it can sit at proper operating temperature. Moisture and carbon stay inside instead of being carried away in a longer drive, and the oil spends most of its life below its ideal window, but the engine never really gets a chance to root. 3. The station commuter. In Australian suburbs, a driver uses a ute or compact SUV for a short hop to the station, then the same short hop home at night. Air conditioning always on, the distance is small so the odometer barely moves, and the service book looks impressive. Yet, day after day, the pattern is the same. Stop-and-go driving, brief idling, shut down, repeat. The engine, oil, and battery are all treated as if the car only knows the first 5 minutes of a journey. But the engine never really gets a chance to. 4. The weekend-only city car. Across the US, the UK, and Australia, many cars live on short urban trips to the gym, friends' houses, or a quick dinner. They may sit for days, then do a string of low-speed hops with every start pulling on the battery and every stop trapping moisture and combustion residue. Owners think this gentle, low-mileage pattern is kindness. In reality, it is a recipe for a short-trip-only engine killer. But the engine never really gets a chance to... Whether your car spends its life in London traffic, suburban America, or the streets of Sydney, the pattern is the same. Short journeys let moisture and carbon stay inside the engine. Short trips chip away at efficiency and long-term health, and repeated 5 or 10-minute runs quietly punish the battery and oil system. It does not look harsh from the driver's seat. There are no lights, no alarms, just a car that seems fine until it is not. If you want to avoid the next mistake most drivers make right after turning the key, you need to look at what happens in those first few minutes. That is where things can get even worse than short trips themselves.